Valentine's Day is one of the biggest spending holidays in the United States, with nearly $22 billion spent on gifts in 2021. But Valentine's Day wasn't always a big deal in the US. So, when did Americans start sending each other Valentines? And how have Valentines changed over time? Hi, I'm Julie and I'm a business historian. And today I'm taking a look at the history of Valentines in the United States. Although Valentine's Day was known in the United States as a day for lovers, the holiday was largely ignored and sending Valentines was not actually widely popularized until about the 1840s. In fact, George Washington's birthday received far more attention than Valentine's Day during the month of February. In comparison, Valentines were all the rage in England. While a flurry of Valentine's Day cards were passing through London post offices, a 1823 Maryland U.S. newspaper noted, "In this republic, where coolness of reason, the devotion to secular business, and freedom from superstition allow few holidays, we seldom witness such scenes of delightful agitation and indescribable anxiety as in London." But Valentine's Day would soon win over the American public, driven largely by fashion and money. In the 1800s, Americans looked to London for the latest trends. With hundreds of thousands of Valentines being sent every year in London, Americans began to wonder what all the fuss was about. Manufacturers and stores capitalized on this growing interest, at first importing Valentines from Britain and then making their own. By 1857, more than 3 million Valentines were sold in the United States, representing an estimated $300,000 in sales, or about $8 million in today's money. According to an 1858 article in Harper's Weekly, there were approximately 13 or 14 manufacturers of Valentines in the United States. And among them was Esther Howland, the daughter of a prominent bookstore and bindery owner in Worcester, Massachusetts. In the 1840s, Esther, a graduate from Mount Holyoke College, saw some new Valentines imported from England in her father's shop. She reportedly became enamored with the design and decided to make her own. Now, she didn't have access to the materials that European manufacturers would have used, so instead, she cut out elaborate scrollwork that was embossed on fancy envelopes to make a kind of lace design. She then added colored lithographic images, pasted everything on a piece of ordinary paper, and scalloped the edges. Esther then had one of her brothers, who was described as an accomplished penman, write love verses. She sent her other brother with several samples to New York and Boston to see if there was any interest in her work. And to her surprise, there was. Her brother returned with several $1,000s worth of orders, more than Esther could make herself. So she employed 4 or 5 young women to help. In her first year, demand for Esther's Valentines doubled. She soon had a thriving business worth between $50,000 and $75,000. The Valentines made by Esther's company were intricate and expensive, costing as much as $50, which is more than $1,000 today. They used satin, silk, embossed die cuts, and a lift flap that revealed a verse or image underneath, all of which were new concepts believed to have originated with Esther herself. Now, despite being in the business of making love letters, Esther Howland herself never married. Instead, she continued to run her business, ignoring lucrative offers from larger Valentine manufacturers to buy her out. It wasn't until her father had an accident that required constant care that Esther sold her company. When Esther Howland died in 1904, newspapers called her the originator of the fancy Valentine industry in the United States. Today, she's known as the mother of the American Valentine. Now, there are several notable differences between Valentines sent in the 1800s versus today. First of which is that the recipient of a sentimental Valentine was expected to reply. Kind of like those "do you like me, check yes or no" notes. Because of this, Valentine's Day was not limited to only February 14th. Instead, it lasted through early March to give recipients time to reciprocate with a Valentine of their own. Valentines also gave people an opportunity to circumvent the formalities of courtship by just asking their desired partner outright. It also gave women an opportunity to take the lead in their own matchmaking, as women and men alike could send a Valentine. Secondly, not all Valentines were affectionate. So-called comic Valentines, which were meant to be rude or satirical, were very popular by the mid-1800s. Often sent anonymously, comic Valentines could target anyone you didn't like, from your teacher to your dentist, as well as people who defied societal norms, such as suffragettes or older unmarried women. They often featured crude, stereotypical caricatures with an offensive verse, and the sender would send the card they thought best matched the recipients. As one newspaper noted, every one must be fitted to the candidate like a shoe. But unlike footwear, the comic Valentine hurts worse when the fit is good. According to Harper's Weekly, the Valentines sold in 1857 were split 50-50 between sentimental cards and the so-called comic cards, and their popularity only continued to grow. Comic Valentines seem to have peaked in the 1890s when reportedly 25 million comic Valentines were sent annually. Around this time, several major retailers stopped selling comic Valentines altogether. This may have reflected growing public outcry to the mean nature of the cards, but it's more likely that comic Valentines simply stopped being profitable. Fierce competition among comic Valentines makers drove their price down to just 1 cent. It simply wasn't worth it for larger businesses to devote valuable shelf space to such a low-priced Valentine. However, comic Valentines continued to be available until the 1940s and 1950s, when they disappeared almost completely. One last major difference is how Valentine's Day cards were written. Early sentimental Valentines featured long, poetic verses declaring one's undying love. Some verses were original. Others came from Valentine's writers, or books of poetry specifically made to be directly copied onto a Valentine's Day card. But over time, Valentine's messages became shorter and more to the point. By the 1950s, a simple "be mine" was sufficient. And this trend towards brief and direct Valentines has continued through today. One thing that hasn't changed is the demand for Valentines. In an increasingly digital world, you might expect Valentine's Day cards to be obsolete, but instead, Valentines remain as popular as ever. In 2020, Americans spent $1.3 billion on Valentine's Day cards. After nearly 2 centuries, sending a Valentine is still a nice way to show that you care about someone. Unless you send a comic Valentine, of course. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look back at Valentines and how they've changed in the United States since the 1800s. If you like this video and you would like to hear me talk about the history behind other ordinary things, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel below. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.